Warm welcome to all participants from the Nordics and from all over the world to this interesting webinar. We named it Rising to the ESG Challenge, Routes Towards Effective Governance. It's organized by Board's Impact Forum, where I'm chair, which is the Nordic chapter of the Climate Governance Initiative. In collaboration with World Economic Forum. It's co-organized with INSEAD Corporate Governance Center. And we're also grateful to the CGI chapters in UK, Singapore and Malaysia to collaborate with us on this. Our agenda includes a presentation of some really interesting findings from a research that INSEAD Center did together with BCG. Following that, we have a very experienced panel of non-executive directors that will share their insights and their findings from working with this. And after that, we will have a fireside chat with another experienced board director and expert on the topic. And then it's time for you to ask your questions to the panelists, and we will end with some closing remarks. At today's webinar, you're all muted with the video off, but we have organized to have the chat box open for your comments, where you can share your insights, and please use the Q&A tab to ask questions to the panel, and you can do that at any time and we will pick it up at the panel in the end. For any technical issues, do send a mail to corporate.governance@insead.edu. So if we go to the next chart, the reason we bring this up is that our current board approach is under very high pressure. And if we look at the first step here, some things that is discussed frequently, and we don't necessarily need to spend so much more time on are things like the risk management, the compliance, the regulation. If we look at the next piece, we have found that boards already start to talk about the tech impact, talents, culture, but they definitely want to spend more time on that. One area, the next area, that boards already spend a lot of time on and want to spend more time on is the strategy, the value creation, and all of the disruption going on. And the two last areas, which we know is coming very quickly now, is, of course, cybersecurity and sustainability. So how do we find time to work on that? If we go to the last little glimpse here, we will see that 60% has not yet discussed how to engage and consider sustainability in the board and which committees should be active in what areas. So it therefore brings me great joy, if we go to the next slide, to introduce to you Ron Sunius. And Ron is a senior advisor with the Boston Consulting Group, but he's also the director in residence at the INSEAD Corporate Governance Center, and has been leading the very interesting research that we look forward to listen to now. Warm welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Liselott. Let me share the slides. Here we go. Welcome, everybody. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you a glimpse of the research that we have done, and also put a little bit in context of the other work that we do with the INSEAD Corporate Governance Center on boards and sustainability. For those of you who have been following our work, you may remember the research and the paper that we issued in 2019 with the 5 archetypes of board behavior in sustainability. We set out to do this and to understand how boards are engaging on the issue of sustainability and how they can become more effective at it. We then, in 2019 and the year before, interviewed 25 directors And among other things, we profiled these 5 archetypes of boardroom behavior and sustainability. And we also identified strategies on how to deal with them. We will share, by the way, these slides afterwards, and there are links to all the papers that we have published before. So if you want to revisit, you can do it through the slides, but you can also go to the Corporate Governance Center website of INSEAD. I wanted to start with this slide, not to go and revisit it, but basically to say that that all these archetypes are still out there, although the deniers are becoming less and less vocal. Now, fast forward to 2022. Earlier this year, we had our first publication in the collaboration that we started with BCG and the INSEAD Corporate Governance Center. It's a multi-year collaboration where we look at the evolving role of boards in ESG and sustainability. Going forward, by the way, we will add search firm Heidrick & Struggles to our collaboration, and we are expecting the next report to come out towards the end of this year. Now, since 2019 and this earlier research that we did, some things changed and some things didn't change. I'd like to put this in the context of the why, what, and the how. The discussion on why sustainability is important, I almost never have anymore with board members. Board members do know why this is important, although if you start to ask board members individually why they think it's important, you get a whole range of different answers. They are much more concerned today about the what and the how. And in this research that we did late last year and we published earlier this year, you actually see that there are still some critical gaps. So 70% of board members only moderately or not at all think they are effective at integrating ESG. And 47% of the board has sufficient ESG competence, they believe themselves, and experience to challenge management, actually. And another interesting we found, and I won't go into that much today, but is that boards believe, or a large number of the boards believe, that the ability of the organization to execute is one of the biggest threats to achieving ESG goals. So it shows that boards are still struggling. What I do think, however, was one of the bigger finds is that 91% of the boards actually want to spend much more time on strategic reflection in sustainability. And this is an interesting link to what Lieselot showed earlier. So board members want to spend and need to spend more time on strategy, but have not been able to integrate sustainability into that discussion. And they will only have the possibility to do that if they have the right structures in place. So talking about strategic reflection in sustainability really involves, how is the context of our business changing? What role do we want to play in that changing context? And how can we make sustainability a source of lasting competitive advantage? And what you really see is that boards have been pushed and demanded to think about more the sustainability hygiene and sustainability controls and practices, which have consumed a lot of time and they didn't get much time to really think about, the more strategic context of how the world is changing and what role sustainability plays in that changing world. And this really involves questions such as, what do these contextual changes mean to our organization? What does it mean to our corporate portfolio? What does it mean to our product portfolio? What does it mean to our supply chain? How do we responsibly allocate capital? And what is our risk appetite in allocating that capital? You know, and how do we and where do we divest? And what does responsible divestment mean to us? I mean, these are some of the questions that we find boards are not getting enough time on, and they actually indicate themselves they want more time to spend more time on this. Yesterday, the link is again in this presentation. We published, together with my colleague Dave Young from BCG, an article that really talks about this and how boards can actually spend more time on this strategic reflection. Again, link in the presentation that will be shared after this webinar. Now, two things that we keep seeing that come back, why integrating sustainability is difficult in corporate strategy and in board practice, are these two things. First, there is this vicious circle of skills shortages. In short, people that are board ready, have board credentials, typically do not have enough or a lot of ESG and sustainability knowledge and experience. The other way around, people that do have enough sustainability and ESG knowledge and experience are not considered to be, board ready. And this is a skills gap that has been identified a couple of times, and it is something that companies are trying to overcome. And we will look at the different models that we found through our research in a few minutes. And there we, sort of share and give insights in how companies are trying to overcome this. The other thing that we see coming back is really the convergence of both speed and complexity in terms of strategy. In short, it used to be that in the past, if you could grasp the past, if you understood the past, and you could grasp the present, you could really anticipate the future. It was just an extrapolation of what has happened before. Strategy wasn't all that complex. In today's rapidly changing world, that is much more different. So the speed of change is increasing, and also the complexity of change is increasing. And the combination of that, we find, often leads to paralysis, non-decision making, and really, sort of postpone the decision or postpone making decisions because there is uncertainty. So how to bridge these two gaps? Building on the earlier research that we did that led, among other things, to these 5 archetypes that I showed you before, we started a research after that really to look into how boards are governing sustainability and ESG into board governance. This was not a subject of the earlier research that led to the archetypes, but we did come across the discussion quite often. Board members were mentioning different models that they used, and also in a way that did not make sometimes didn't make much sense to us. So, for instance, there was this company that had a fully set up separate sustainability committee on the board, but as a company they were really underperforming in terms of sustainability. And then the opposite example, there was an organization that didn't integrate formally sustainability into board governance, and they were one of the highest performers that we came across. So we really wanted to understand what are these models that companies use, and what are the pros and the cons of each of these models. So this report came out earlier this year, and given the amount of time that I have, I can only give you a very brief overview of what we find. but I would really encourage you to look at the report, because each and every of the models that we found, as well as the complementary practices that we started to call plugins, are detailed out. Pros and cons and tips on how to use them are all included in that report. So I'll start first with the 6 governance models that we found. We also found that there is not a one-size-fits-all. What works for your individual organization really depends on a huge number of things that include industry, company size, geographical locations, type of products, maturity of the organization in terms of sustainability, maturity of the board in terms of sustainability. So there is not really a one-size-fits-all, and it makes sense for each and every company to look at the pros and the cons to see where they are and what makes sense at this stage for you, and and that might change in a year or two if you evolve and become more mature in terms of board governance on sustainability. So the models that we found range from fully integrated to not embedded at all. Not embedded at all means it's not being discussed. It's not part of the decision-making process. It's not part of the strategy development. It's just not mentioned. There may be a sustainability report that the board needs to approve, but it's not part of board governance and board process. Fully integrated, on the other side, really means that in every discussion there is on the board and every decision that needs to be made, sustainability is an element of that decision making. The 4 models in between, I will mention to you briefly. The dedicated committee is perhaps the most complicated one to integrate, or at least brings most work. And it is where companies have a dedicated separate committee for sustainability. So like you have an audit committee, there will be a separate committee fully focused on sustainability and ESG. The next model, adding to an existing committee, that's a model where sustainability as a responsibility is added to one of the standing committees, be it audit committee, be it the strategy committee, be it any of the other committees, but it's added to one specific sustainability committee. The next one down is a multiple committee responsibility. And this is really where sustainability is spread between existing committees. So for instance, sustainability reporting could be added to the audit committee. Long-term strategic planning could be added to the strategy committee. Making sure you have the right knowledge on the executive and non-executive board in terms of sustainability could be added to the nomination committee. So it's really a spread among existing committee. And the next one down is the board champion. And that's a model used by companies where there is one non-executive board member who takes the responsibility of sustainability. As said, there is not a one-size-fits-all. In an ideal world, it's fully integrated. If you're not there yet, you could see, any of the middle green 4 models as a transition towards getting it fully integrated into board decision making. Here are some of the numbers that we got from the research we did with BCG. So you can see, among the boards that we researched, the percentage of companies that are actually using these models that we have identified, where you see the fully integrated mentioned most. That I think it's a bit risky to actually believe that 31% of the companies have fully integrated it, because it's the most obvious one to say if you don't have any of the other ones. So that's a number you need to be a little bit cautious about. The other ones are they speak for themselves, I would say. What we also found is that in addition to the formal structure of integrating ESG in corporate governance is 6 complementary practices. We started to call them plugins. And we find that these are, the most archetypical. There are variations on these themes, but these are the most archetypical. And you can actually mix and match these models. So, it doesn't, not the models, sorry, plugins. So it doesn't really mean that you need to choose one of them. You can use also a multiple of them, or over time you can change from one to the other model. I'll briefly go over them as well. So the first one, update from external advisors and experts. That really means as a board, you bring in external people to update you on the world of sustainability in general, or perhaps very specific on a topic that is on your agenda. I don't know, CO2 emissions or water or whatever. You get an expert from external to talk about this. What's also interesting, what we found is that those companies that have not yet set targets are using external experts more often. And once companies have set targets, they don't use the external experts anymore that often, and they start changing to internal experts. The next one down is the permanent or semi-permanent external experts or advisors. This could be, it's similar to the first one, but it has a more structural character. So, for instance, as an example, I have for the past 4 years been supporting a sustainability committee of a large multinational bank as a sort of semi-permanent external expert that has been added and as in advising the non-executive director responsible for that committee. Similarly, you could do that with internal experts and advisors. So you could really look at, how can we integrate, people within the organization that know a lot about sustainability in a more structural way to discuss these things. As mentioned, this is more often used in situations where sustainability targets have been set. Then the fourth one is updates from sustainability management. Well, you'll see in the numbers, this is one that is used very often. The sustainability director comes to the board every year, twice a year, give them an update on where they stand. That's an obvious one and an easy one to use. One that we have seen a couple of times work very well, but is really underused, in my opinion, is the sustainability task force with board members and executives. So that's really, it gets close to a sustainability committee, but it isn't. It's not a formal committee, but it's a group, a task force, whatever the name is that they use, but a group of people that works together, executives and non-executives, on sustainability topics. And one that we see used every now and again is an independent external sustainability council. There's a whole range of responsibilities that can be given to the council. Some use more of these responsibilities, some use less. In short, these are the most archetypical, if you will, complementary practices that we have seen, and they are used in combination often to complement the different models. Here, an overview of these complementary practices and how often they are used. Not surprisingly, updates from sustainability management on top, and the independent external sustainability council on the bottom. I really think, and in the situations I've seen that used, that an external sustainability council is an ideal way to bridge that knowledge gap that we identified earlier. So there where you can't find non-executives with the right non-executive background that know a lot about sustainability. An external sustainability council can bridge that gap because you can bring in people that have that experience, but that are not formally becoming a non-executive director. This is what I'd like to share with you. I would really recommend you look at the full report because, as I mentioned before, all these models are detailed out and with the pros and cons and how to use them. I wanted to leave you with one thought though, and that is that although there is not a one size fits all for all these models, I'm starting to come to the conclusion that there is a lot of merit in using the combination of fully integrated and spreading the responsibility between existing committees, where the full board really focuses on strategic reflection and implications of sustainability. The committees can then really focus on sustainability hygiene, sustainability controls and practices. That's my bit. Thanks very much. And I'll hand over to you, Lieselot.
Thank you so much, Ron. It really portrays how much variation we have right now. But now it's time for all of the participants to give them a bit of flavor from your perspective. So we have a poll for you that I hope Ivy's releasing. Thank you. And we want you to give us your perspective. Have you discussed at the board how you should integrate sustainability in different board processes and in which committees? So have you discussed at the board how you should work with this? And we look forward to your answers. So we'll give it a couple of seconds more. Can we see the result? So thank you so much. So we have about 60% that in some ways have discussed it, and about 40% that has yet the opportunity to discuss it. That brings us over to introducing our eminent panel, and which we're going to discuss with. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Johan Raslan, who is an independent board director at commercial companies, and he's also the board member of Institute of Corporate Directors in Malaysia. He's also on the committee of the Climate Governance Initiative in Malaysia. So warm welcome, Johan. Lisa Kingo is a non-executive director at several international companies, and she's the prior executive director of UN Compact, and she's also a strategic advisory board member to Boards Impact Forum. Welcome, Lisa. Nora is the vice president group strategic investments of ADNOC. She is a board member of a number of these investments companies, including companies like City Gas, and works also with the sustainability initiatives. Warm welcome, Nora. And we also have Susan Hooper, who's the chair of 2 different companies and a board member of a number of interesting companies. And she's also the co-founder and on the committee of the UK CGI chapter 0. Welcome, Susan. So I wanted to start with if you can reflect on the results of the poll and share with us how your boards decided how to organize the sustainability work and the committees, and what were some of the key drivers ending up if you have different results. Maybe we can start with Nora.
Thank you, Lisbeth. Thank you, Ron, for the presentation as well. Very interesting results. So to start with, the boards I sit at are all located in the United Arab Emirates. So I think, to give context about it, so the UAE has been, let's say, committed to sustainability, let's say, long time back, which stretches back from our founding father, who was a pioneer in sustainability, who balanced economic development with environmental responsibility. So having said that, the attention for such important subject actually shall definitely come from the top. Be it, let's say, from the company's executive management, to the board members, to the leadership team, in addition to incorporating it in the company strategy itself. And this is exactly what we are doing, let's say, in the companies that I sit at. So I just sat at multiple companies. They are all at different stages, I would say. However, the attention and having, let's say, ESG as a key priority is applicable to all of them. So let's say, I'll give an example of what one of the companies, at least, the biggest one out of them. So ESG is sitting there, not just, let's say, as a key priority, but it's being reflected and actually embedded in the strategy. In addition to having it reflected in the strategy itself, there is like a dedicated team inside the organization that looks after this one and monitors actually as well the progress towards the targets that have been, let's say, set by the management for that. In addition to monitoring, they have the reporting mechanism as well, so that it's not just like to say greenwashing targets, but actually this is something that the organization believes in and embeds with it across. Besides all that, it's important for them as well. So it's not just like, I would say, being embedded or being, let's say, owned by the leadership or by the dedicated team, but it's being reflected at multiple teams, whereas this is something they always talk about. They communicate to the whole organization, and they keep motivating the team actually to embed such targets and behavior in their daily work. So the way they are trying to position it is like something the company is aspiring to achieve, rather than something that the company is mandated or, I would say, is forced to do.
Thank you, Nora. So it's quite close to the recommendation which Ron had with make it fully integrated and then have core teams. Joanne, what is your perspective? Any reflection on the poll and how did you get it into your boards?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me from Malaysia and Southeast Asia. Very pleased to be here. Excellent report by Ron, superb. And, I identify with almost everything that's said in there. Even that bit about the Sustainability sort of Council or Advisory Board. Love that bit. Things we've touched upon a lot. Let's say a number of places I've been involved with. Let's say one of them, we have moved along from sort of right to left on that section where you have hardly anything being done, and then suddenly you embed it in one committee. We kind of think about it, add it to the work of that committee, the risk committee in our case, and then realize that gosh, actually it's the risk committee's already got a lot on, and then you have to add this on. You were giving it, the risk committee was giving it an hour and a half, then it became 2 hours, then their other work suffered. So then you move to setting up a new committee, which is where we're at now. But I think it's partly that, and it's partly embedded because we're doing a certain amount of work in the nomination and remuneration committee, and also a certain amount in the audit committee as well. We're keeping an eye on it there, and our auditors, well done to them, keep on raising these issues to us and pointing out the risks to the board and getting us all frightened, which is good for them. Well done. So we're moving along the spectrum there. I share what Ron says. If you say it's all embedded, that could mean you're actually doing not a lot at all. So
yeah.
So I think we have to be careful with that 30%. And what drove that really was people saying, oh, you don't want to spend too much time on it. You want to balance the amount of time. Especially the management. Don't forget, management have got to come and appear pretty well for a whole week or even week and a half at committee after committee after committee. There are papers to prepare and so on that takes another week before that, and they've got other work to do. So you're always conscious of not wanting to overburden management. also, you kind of, at first, we were thinking, well, who's going to do this? We don't really know enough. But then later, what we did was we actually added members of the board who knew a lot about ESG. So they came on an ESG ticket, to the board. Let's say another driver, actually, in our case in Malaysia, and I think in Singapore as well, and probably in Thailand, is outside pressure. So regulators. If you're in the banking sector, you're being severely whacked by banking regulators pushing the ESG agenda, and especially climate change. The capital markets regulator is pushing that as well. The stock exchange is pushing new rules on disclosure and also selection of directors. And also the sovereign wealth funds, which have big stakes in a lot of companies, are also pushing their own they've got all their rules or charters, whatever they call them, that impact on a lot of big companies. So there's a lot being done from the outside. So not just because of the goodness of our hearts, but also the outside pressure is there. So there's a lot of factors coming into play.
Thank you so much, Johan, and it's very interesting to see how it has progressed from a start and still hopefully still progressing. Let's go to Lisa and listen to you, and you sit on a number of different European companies, so maybe you can contrast a bit. How did you find the poll, and how did you actually get it in? And I happen to know that you actually have a number of different models at your different companies.
Yes, thank you, Liselott. So first of all, Ron, many thanks for your presentation. I think it provided, the perfect backdrop for the discussion we are having now. So I want to take a starting point in your observations. So I'm on the board of 3 listed multinational companies in Europe. The first of them, an investment company as part of the Aker Group in Norway, has your first model, the fully integrated one. And I think from a strategic perspective, that makes perfect sense, because the vision of the company is to support the global energy transition by investments in renewable energy. So clearly, sustainability is a key theme that must be integrated into all strategic and operational decisions in that company. In terms of the dedicated committee, I'm also on a major German chemicals material company, part of the DAX 30. In that industry, it's a big deal to transform into circular economy. That is a huge industrial transformation that needs to happen. And in this company, it has been decided to create a specific sustainability committee that I have the pleasure of chairing. And I can assure you that a number of very important strategic discussions are happening. And I think it's very helpful to have a committee where you actually have the time for these discussions, because they are hard to squeeze into a, how should I say, regular board meeting. The committee is open to everyone. We have 4 members, but everyone can join. So we also try to keep this committee meeting open for everyone to come in, learn, and see how things are evolving. The last model I have an example of is from a large pharmaceutical company, where a specific sustainability has been added to the existing nominations and governance committee. I think that works well too, based on the fact that the company has fully integrated ESG into their relatively new transformational business strategy. So the business strategy has a set of goals and KPIs for sustainability, just as they have for finance, product introductions, and so on. So the fact that the strategy is so integrated gives this multiple committee a very easy way, how should I say, to plug into the strategy. So I think all three models work, but it's very much models that have been created based on where the companies are and what role sustainability plays in their business strategies.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. I think that is so profound. And I can also hear that one of the dimensions is you need to have more time. You need to have time to spend on this super important topic, and you just can't have it all in the overall board. So thank you so much for sharing this. Let's go to Susan, who is really one of the trailblazers, including sustainability and driving sustainability on board levels, very much in UK and also within international companies. And we'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for those kind words as well. A lot of what's already been said, I don't want to repeat. I think what Ron presented is a really useful structure for us to look at boards and what suits best. And it's wonderful to see just 3 years ago, where it was hardly on the agenda, now we actually have some experience about understanding how it can be structured. There are two things, though, that I'd like to mention, and I actually feel that the archetypes that Ron talked about of board behavior are more archetypes of leadership behavior, like CEO and chair, and you can almost determine the outcome of the path you go along, the options for solutions, depending on how your CEO, especially, I would say, embraces this issue, whether they see it as an issue and an opportunity or as a regulatory tick box exercise. It changes the way the board can impact. By the way, the board can also impact the leadership. So I think we have to always remember that. But at the moment, I'd say I've sat on a number of different boards, and one board, I've moved from being the lone voice to it being integrated into audit, to it being a standalone committee. And I think that's the second point I want to make, is we're dealing with incomplete information about what the right solution is. The right solution depends on leadership, it depends on industry, it depends on progress that you've already made. And the board has to be ready and on top of the issue to be able to adapt as more information comes in. So for me, the single most important one, and it's super the board, above the board, is the leadership and the way they embrace this issue. And secondly, I would say, be ready to adapt and move as soon as you have more information to a more substantial form. Otherwise, I agree with all of the other points that have been made, and it's thrilling to see response from the audience to say that so much discussion is now happening.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to follow that up, because one of the things we're finding as well is that it's easy to talk about, but it does take a lot of courage from certain members to move the agenda and bring it up. And I wanted to ask Johan, so you are one of these trailblazers. What was the challenges when you started to work with it, and how did you overcome them?
Well, it's really kind of you to say I'm a trailblazer, but I wouldn't say I am. I started to raise it. At one time, I had a chairman that was really pushing the agenda. Chairman then changed. Many new things on the agenda for pandemic, etc., for the new chairman. I think I would say other factors came into play, and I brought them in, if you like, shared papers from the outside, etc. And also I discussed with directors offline. And I found, for example, a very influential director who was an expert in the subject, property development, where I am working. So he's a former CEO of a big property company. Everybody expected him when he joined the board to be, forget all this faddish stuff. And I connected with him offline and found that he was a very keen on sustainability and climate change and all this. And so I connected with him, and sort of we all worked together offline to bring things up during meetings. So various ways. I mean, yeah, I agree with the point made that going head on can be not the right thing, depending on the culture of the company and the culture of the board.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it also comes back to the super important role the chair has to actually put it on the agenda. So any other comments, Susan, because you have also pushed the envelope a bit with your boards?
Thank you. Yes, I'm quite passionate about this topic because I think sometimes we fall into important board roles as a part of the natural progression within our career. And we forget exactly how influential we are as a member of the board, and actually fundamentally being responsible for the outcome, not just for, in the next 3 to 5 years, but, 10 to 15 years as well. And I do think that when you accept a position like this, even if it's your first one, you have to be ready to be what I call the tallest poppy in the field. And that means if you disagree with what's happening, or if you don't think that we're being robust enough, you have to be prepared to stand out. And being that lone voice, and that is some experience that I've had, is really uncomfortable. No one likes to not be loved and embraced and part of the team, but it is at least in the UK, it's a legal responsibility. You have to speak up if you think things are wrong. So I think, trailblazer or not, you have to make sure that you stand up for what you think is right, even in the face of not having the support, and recognize where you do have influence. There are lots of ways of trying to gather the board around you and to give you more confidence. But I think people taking on these roles have to accept the responsibility that the outcome of the company's business rests on our shoulders. It's happening during our watch, and we need to be standing up and saying something.
Thank you, Susan. I so agree with that. And now I want every participant to pick up a pen and do some notes on your own paper. Are you driving this topic enough on your boards? And is there any inspiration you can get from each other and this webinar that you could do possibly something more? And now I want to go over to actually talk a bit about how do you identify what topics are material? How do you get it integrated across sustainability and operations? And not the least, how do you work to find opportunities and discuss that on the board? Do you want to comment on that, Nora?
Sure, thank you. So to start with, I mean, as a board members, we always should have this mentality that this is like an ever-evolving landscape. So having it today, let's say what today's targets and measures could be different, let's say a year from now, could be different 2 years from now. I mean, looking at sustainability and ESG today, compared to how it was a year ago and 2 years ago, I mean, the transformation and the change has been fundamentally like different. So it's like it continues to evolve. So this is like a starting point. As a company, I think the companies, I mean, and I'll talk about specifically, let's say the companies I set up. So one of the companies is like very committed to creating lasting and sustainable value for the people, the business, and the society. And they are trying to do this by integrating, let's say, best-in-class HSE standards. So it's not just like only sustainability initiatives, but like what comes underneath that. So from, let's say, HSE standards, integrating that into the operations, giving back to communities, supporting sustainable economic development of the community we are, let's say, operating at, and investing in clean energy as well, besides integrating risk management across the entire value chain. So it's not just like a one measure or let's say a dedicated team only that's working on solo. It's actually like try to be integrated across. The key factor, I think, in understanding and evaluating, let's say, the opportunities that arise from ESG factors, And this is what we are trying to push for, but not necessarily like it's happening across all companies, but like to shift the mindset actually. So it's not really to be considered as a risk to be mitigated or as a risk to be managed, but it's rather an opportunity that companies should actually be driving towards and aspiring to be a pioneer and achieving, or let's say, incorporating these targets into their strategies and companies. So that's how we think about it. When we come to how do we measure the impact or how do we integrate it, we try to look at it from, let's say, how will it impact company, how will it impact our operations, how will it impact our people, how will it impact let's say, the community where we operate at.
Thank you, Nora. And it's obvious that you work a lot with it because you have a lot of insights and details on how it's actually being done. Lise, how do you work on this challenge on identifying the core materiality topics, and how do you in specific actually look for also opportunities, not just risks?
Yeah, so let me pick up where Nora left. I think it's so true that the ESG agenda is evolving all the time. It's this animal that are changing shape and form, you know, almost every day. And clearly that needs to be part of the annual risk discussion in the board. I think that one thing is to have the risk analysis and make sure that you map some of the issues that you believe might occur going forward. But I want to elaborate a little bit on what many boards are hit by these days, which are the different impacts of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the consequences in terms of energy prices, in terms of deciding whether you want to continue selling your products in Russia, because I think it's such a good example of, you know, how important it is to recalibrate how you see materiality and what could have crucial impact on your business on a regular basis, because things are happening so quickly these days. And, you know, in my experience, I think in particular, the decisions of whether to leave the Russian market, how to take care of employees in Russia and in Ukraine have been new issues that have really accentuated what this maybe a little bit theoretical materiality discussion once a year in the board is actually all about. Because it touches the financial bottom line, but it definitely also touches the whole reputation and responsibility perception of the company, how you decide to address the whole geopolitical agenda, which I believe has been added to the ESG agenda today.
And I couldn't agree more. It's we have an increased influx of topics. So we just have 1 minute left. If I can pick your brains, 30-second recommendation, any approach or anything you think you as a board member could intervene or do as a board to actually improve the effectiveness of guiding sustainability. Lisa, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So let me go back to Ron's framework again on the why, what, and how. I think companies know why, basically also what to do, but I think the how to do it has changed fundamentally during the first part of this year. And I think as a board member, you need to push executive management to explain to you how the implementation of the business strategy, including ESG, has changed.
Right. Thank you so much, Lisa. Let's go to Nora. Do you have a 30-second recommendation?
So I agree with this, so I will not repeat the same things. In addition to that, as a board member, we should have, let's say, the mentality that this is a focus in ESG is a corporate purpose. So it's not just like another agenda item. And to increase the focus on ESG, management shall keep it always simple and clear, answering the questions that basically Lisa has asked, and to the what, how, why, and how does it impact the whole organization.
Thank you. Joanne.
Slightly different is we work, my company works through our Malaysian chapter of the CGI, and they work together with something called the CEO Action Network on Sustainability. So it's directors is CGI and CEOs is the CEO Action Network, work together, and we go and try to engage with regulators, government ministries, and also in our case, because it's property development, city councils to push the agenda, and other stakeholders as well. We find that you have to do that as well. You can't just sit and wait for rules to hit you. You've got to try and shape the landscape as well. Thank you.
Which is a new role for boards to be more proactive into the influencing piece. A final thing from you, Susan.
Yeah, I had two, but I know we only have time for one. But that builds on nicely from Johan. I think the message is don't wait for perfect. We tend to do the risk analysis ad infinitum to the absurd sometimes on boards, and yet things like COVID kind of slip in and hit us, blindside us. But the road to net zero, which is obviously the path that we have to follow on, is not a straight one. We're going to take many turns as we try and get back on track, and we will make mistakes. And that's a sense that most boards are not yet comfortable with. But I think boards need to create a culture where it's okay to move and then adapt once we've got greater information and greater insight, because we don't have enough to really be assured now, but we can't wait until we do have that insight. Yeah. So don't wait for perfect is my message.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very nice and guiding message. And thank you so much to the panel. You will come back again and give some more perspectives after the fireside chat that we are going into now. And before that, we're actually going to ask a short poll from our audience again. So this time we wanted to ask you in a poll, we have a formalized stakeholder engagement with all of our key stakeholders in our board governance. So have you a formalized stakeholder engagement with all of your key stakeholders in your board governance? Fully agree to fully disagree. And the stakeholders are, of course, the employees, the customers, the investors, the governments, the society, it can be the creditors, it can be the media. So do you have a guidance on that? Let's see what we got from that. So we have a mixture, which we also found in a recent peer exchange we did, that here is probably a good way and segue into the panel discussion to look at some of these results. So let us bring the panel, the fireside chat back on. And it's a delight for me to introduce Nicolas Nonin, who is a non-executive board director. He's also a member of the Institut Français d'Administrateurs, and he's part of the task force on ESG matters on the EU, the ECODA. And Sonia is the executive director of the Corporate Governance Institute, and she will lead the fireside chat. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Liselott. Thank you to all our distinguished panelists. A great conversation. And of course, with Nicola, we will try and build on this and pick some of the questions as well later on with the full panel. Welcome, Nicola. Thank you for joining us as well. So let's kick off. And my first question to you, Nicolas, you have been doing some work with the ILA, which is with the IFA, the l'Institut Français of Administrateurs, and the ECODA, the European Commission Confederation for Directors. And you have been working on ESG matters in the task force for this. So actually, what do you think the main area of attention should be for board of directors?
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Lisa, also for the kind introduction. And thank you to Ron and to the wonderful panel. I think we just heard it. It's very interesting to have this complementary perspective based on practice. Coming back to your question, Sonia, I guess the short answer for me could be a main area of attention is for the board to ensure the consistency of the ESG approach. I think we have a consistency imperative. And when I'm saying that, it's just not a mere, risk mitigating role for the board. Actually, I think it's a critical role for the board to lay a cornerstone for an ambitious strategy. And as you mentioned, maybe I can illustrate that with the works we have performed at IFA and ECODA. We've adopted a very much hands-on approach, practice-based, very much focused on the how. And so we ask ourselves very basic questions for a board member that is not used to these topics. What are the key points I should raise in terms of ESG when I'm sitting in the boardroom? And to do so, we went through the board missions and directors' duty of care, and we checked that against, the effectiveness of the governance of ESG. And starting, of course, with the board discussion on strategy. Of course, the management will present you a nice ESG approach, and Ron alluded to that. But what about the consistency between the ESG ambition and the actual business strategy? Are we prepared to transform our business? What does it mean in terms of competitiveness, processes, skill and competencies? How do we deal with innovation? And also very important, can we put figures on that in terms of CapEx, in terms of OpEx, and so on? So in short, strategy is about execution. And to coming back to my consistency point, are we consistent when it comes to execution? Same for internal controls. Do we have the right tool and resources inside, internally? Same when it comes to the consistency between the financial and non-financial information, very important vis-a-vis external stakeholders, very important internally, of course, to make informed and robust decision. Maybe I'll come to that later on. And going through the mission of the board, the last example, and not the least, is everything about, around the remuneration. If we believe that remuneration is meant to align, the management with the strategy of the company, if we say that ESG is embedded in strategy, then to be consistent, it needs to be reflected in the remuneration scheme within the company. In the short-term incentive, of course, and by essence, ESG long-term, so it should be reflected in the long-term incentive, which is a slightly more difficult topic. So basically, a very interesting as well, and models are being developed. I stop here, but my point is, and consistency is an imperative. And one last point, sorry, is I don't want to give the impression that this is a topic, for large multinational enterprise, etc., and so on. I believe this is a topic for all, for SMEs. We should all bear that in mind, of course, and for very pragmatic reasons. If you look at the regulations, for instance, the upcoming EU regulation, the scope of the company that are covered is very broad. The thresholds are pretty low. I think the EU is assessing that to approximately 50,000 companies covered. So it's a topic for all. And even though you wouldn't be covered by those regulations or touched by those regulations or concerned, I think your SME is being part of a value chain, and you will be involved to some extent. Maybe I'll come to that later on.
Thank you, Nicolas. Actually, definitely, I understand the fact of you know, how ESG needs to be consistent and integrated in the full ecosystem of the organization of the business, means going from strategy into operationalize it, correct? And there the question is between the role of the boards and the management, but we'll come to this later on. Why do you think consistency is important? Because of course, consistency, and you mentioned many elements, remuneration and so many. Why it's important?
Because, you know, the ESG, this ESG journey will also be about, you know, sweat and tears. And we really need to have that consistency so the board is on solid ground. What I mean here is that today there is this, you know, huge hype around the ESG. Board are snowed under, you know, ESG strategies, initiative, expectations, and so on. Such enthusiasm is great. The momentum is great, and this all this is great, provided that we bear in mind that we are entering the hard part of the journey. This transition to a green and fair economy will not be a smooth ride, and the board will have a formidable role to play. It's been mentioned. To navigate the bumpy ride, and more interestingly, to turn that into opportunities. And this really depends on the board's ability to make, I would say, and Liselott mentioned it, the board's ability to make courageous decision, informed decision, and its ability to explain those decisions.
Yeah, thank you actually for picking up on that from what Liselott said. I'm gonna actually ask you the question is, can you tell us more about what do you mean by courageous decision for the board, you know, to take? Because of course, aren't they taking always courageous decision or strategic decision? Tell us more about this.
Yes, of course. Well, this is potentially the toughest challenge for the board as we enter, you know, this era of stakeholders capitalism, whatever you call it. I think we have a serious quote unquote arbitration challenge ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And my point is the point is the following: is that most companies, and rightly so, are willing to take into account you know, stakeholders' expectations. Great. Concretely, the company and the board will be faced with an increasing amount of expectation coming from an increasingly diverse stakeholders. I'm not talking about the concept of relevant stakeholders, although I should say a word about it. Anyway, all the stakeholders will have at times conflicting, even contradictory, competing expectations. And the point is that, guess what? Not all expectations will be met. Not all stakeholders will be satisfied. Okay, I know it's bad. I shouldn't say it, but not all expectations not all stakeholders will be satisfied. And so in practice, and that's the challenge sitting in the boardroom, the board will have to make arbitrations. Okay, and concrete example, arbitration sometimes between the E, the environmental dimension, the S, the social dimension. And the board's ability to explain, to substantiate this decision is of critical importance as we implement our ESG strategy and approach. This is, in my view, a very critical point for and challenge for the board. By the way, it is also outlining the importance of all the work that is being done in terms of new non-financial information, non-financial reporting, because provided, of course, you know, in Europe, elsewhere, provided, of course, that there is a convergence, because it will help us, I mean, the board, to explain and to make indisputable, if you will, arbitrations.
Okay, great. We'll come to the arbitration later on and with the panel when we have, because it would be interesting to hear from all how to actually prioritize and arbitrate among stakeholders. Keep that to the next panel, and we'll come back to that to engage all the panel in this. The next question I have for you, actually, Nicola, is that how can board up their game on ESG matter? What is the areas of improvement that we see now, and what do you see the development ahead?
Well, I believe a most interesting development and room for improvement, the development and main area for improvement will be to go beyond, being company centric, if you will, meaning that focusing on the performance of my own company, to being value chain minded. We're familiar with that in the, when we deal with the environmental dimension. Of course, we have this scope 1, 2, 3. I don't want to be technical, but and so for most companies, scope 1 and 2 are somehow limited, and the bulk of the environmental challenge is captured under the scope 3, meaning in the value chain, upstream and downstream. Interestingly enough, it's becoming applicable to the S, the social dimension. If you look at the EU, European Corporate Due Diligence Directive, you also have this upstream and downstream relationship that are part of it. So it's also becoming applicable again in the social dimension. So again, being more value chain minded. I think this is, by the way, a great opportunity for everybody, including for the board, because it helps us, to take a deep dive into the operations and to innovate, across the whole ecosystem. So that's very, very interesting. By the way, meaning the whole ecosystem, and I'm coming back to the point about, the SMEs, meaning that all the small enterprises and will be involved in the exercise. Another point is that since we were mentioning stakeholders' expectations, taking a deep dive into operation is also very demanding for the company, for the board. It should also be very demanding for the stakeholders. Okay, we're talking about stakeholder expectations. I tend to believe that they also have duties. Okay, but it's a very important point. Don't want to be too long here. I think we have limited time.
Yeah.
But what I'm describing here is that in my view, the growing pains of ESG, and the good news is that following the growing pains, we normally have a more mature, more resilient, more stronger body organization, and a stronger and a more effective governance of ESG.
Thank you very much, Nicola. And it's a nice segue for me to invite the panelists back, all together with Ron as well, into a broader conversation. Thank you to our audience who have been sending us actually questions before the webinar, and also now being very, very engaged. So I'm picking up on some of your questions, and I'm going to start. The first question I would like to address here is that given the number of various challenges that boards are facing, beyond the cybersecurity, the geopolitical, the digital, the risks, the financial risks, all of this, ESG alone, there are 3 pillars, the E, the S, and the G. So how can where should board focus between the 3 pillars, the E, the S, and the G? Anyone would like to kickstart this conversation from our panelists here? Okay, Liz, can I just ask you the question?
Absolutely.
Susan, we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that.
Sure, thank you.
So, that's, I think, a question of what the company is doing, what products it's issuing, and where the biggest material risks are. So, a heavy production company clearly has to focus on the environmental side, on the energy side. Again, a pharmaceutical company that are working for people, with people, have to focus a lot on the social side, addressing, for example, the whole access to health issues. So I think that's maybe the overall response, Sonia. But then I think when you look at, you know, surveys on where companies are focusing, there's clearly a tendency that they are focusing on the environmental issues because they're sometimes perceived as the most tangible and easy issues to deal with. And there's a lot of reporting regulation that is very specific in this area. It's also clear that the social issues are not getting sufficient attention. That's very clear when you analyze companies' reports, that they are often quite weak on social responsibility, which is not a good match with the fact that social inequalities in the world are increasing and the global goals relating to inequalities are, you know, performing still worse and worse. So I think it's good advice to companies to really gear up on the social side because of the geopolitical developments in the world. Finally, I think on governance, it's a topic that many companies feel, oh, what has that to do with sustainability or with you know, responsible business? But personally, I feel that the recent geopolitical challenges have shown very clearly that you need to have the right governance in place to make sure that you are prepared for also some of the issues that Nicola is mentioning on the supply chain and how you want to develop that in the future. I mean, if the world is developing into more decentralized blocks, as it looks at the moment, I mean, decisions about governance and where to put your production sites, where you want to have the majority of your suppliers in the world becomes crucially important. So that's my thinking at the moment, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Susan, you wanted to actually say a few words on this, and then we move to the next question.
Well, yes, and forgive me, because I think I'm going to be a bit challenging on this one. I feel quite passionate about it, and it's predicated by the fact that I really believe that if you need to solve an issue, you need to focus on it. And life is often obfuscated by loads of other priorities and issues that come in. But unless you focus on the real priorities, they're not going to be changed. I remember when ESG first came in as a topic, I was thinking, this is just going to dilute our focus on the environment and sustainability. And I was actually quite devastated by it, not because I don't stand to even gain or be a big participant in the S side. And I do think governance is pretty much well established, but I just felt that it was taking the eye off the ball of an issue that needs to be solved, and we don't have the luxury of inaction that we've shown on the societal equities because of the time box nature of this problem. So I'm going to be controversial and say you won't solve the problem unless you focus on it. The one hope I have, though, is, and I see this from Chapter 0, is that unlike the representation on boards, which in the UK is 30-70 women to men, in Chapter 0, which is board members trying to help solve and educate themselves on this problem, it's 70-30. So there is, you're killing two birds with one stone, as we would say.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you. And actually, this is what we love about having different point of views, also to challenge each other. And, you know, it's a conversation and it's open dialogue. My next question, which I hold on earlier on when speaking to Nicola, is about stakeholders prioritization. So any of you would like to say a few words about how do you actually prioritize among all these asks, demands, expectations from different stakeholders? Anybody would like to take this?
Perhaps me. Okay. I'm not sure you can really prioritize among stakeholders so much of 1, 2, 3, and so and so's low down the list. but certainly, all stakeholders have to be identified and addressed. And to get back to Susan's point, and also to Lisa also mentioned, the S part is very critical. My part of the world, Southeast Asia, we have issues with human trafficking. We have issues with foreign workers and how they are treated compared to local workers and all that stuff. And what I've seen in boards that I've worked with over the years is boards can be very skeptical about the traditional things. Oh, when it comes to the accounts, they're skeptical. They'll ask for the external auditors, go and check it, and they'll question the CFO. When it comes to how we treat our foreign workers, then we tend to fall in line with management. And the skepticism has to continue. So I was involved with an advisory board, which is just like the sustainability committee, the external sustainability committee that was mentioned earlier by Ron. And we questioned the board, so we challenged the board that you're putting out report after report saying that we're treating our workers right. Have you got internal reports from trusted third-party sources that tell you this? Or have you in fact got reports that say the exact opposite, but you just want to believe? It's nice to believe for management. It's a touchy subject in most parts of the world, but I think in Southeast Asia it is a big subject because many industries will grind to a halt without our foreign workforce. And companies are starting to come to the point of view that they have to be treated equally with local workers in all aspects. And that's taking a long time to come through. And I think the winning companies will be the ones that come to that point of view quicker than the others. So there's the opportunity, if you like, is in facing up to these facts quicker. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Johan. This is very helpful. One further question I would like to address as well here is that, we see lots of discussions about ESG data, also ESG ratings, but we also see lots of frameworks. Do you consider this data and ratings are actually pushing, influencing boards and management into the right direction of actually addressing ESG? And do you feel that there is a confusion in the market? There are so many reporting frameworks like the GRI, SASB, and then the EFRAG, and you name it, many of them. What's your view on this? Should there be a standardization? Of course, Ron spoke earlier about there is no size fits all, but how can boards find themselves in all of these momentum outside that is moving targets, moving reporting, moving, everything is actually up to speed. Anybody would like to take this as a start?
I'll start with that, Sonia.
Okay, go ahead, Nora.
So I'll start with what Susan said earlier. She said that there are a lot of things that are out there for the ESG and sustainability that we don't know about yet. And you don't always need to be perfect actually for you to start proceeding or progressing towards that target as a mean for the company. So adding to that, having all these different frameworks, having all these, let's say, reports out there, the way we look at it basically is like to start with what's really applicable for the company and where we operate. So, different targets or different reports will be dedicated for specific locations, for example, or specific type of operations. So we start like eliminating these. But when you come to the broader picture, I agree with you. There's like a lot there. So it's just like, you can't really like start picking and choosing, but rather like focus on the reports that gives you, let's say, I would say the bigger picture, for example. So in terms of climate change, what are the targets that are out there for, let's say, countries-wide, let's say, strategy? What's embedded in the country that we are operating in? What's, let's say, embedded in the regulatory, let's say, requirements for the countries where we have operations in, with our home country or other, let's say, countries where we have operations or we import or export with. So these kind of things. In terms of actually aligning all these reports or aligning all these frameworks, honestly, I don't think this could be achieved, honestly, at least in the short run, because just like what Ron said, I mean, there's no one size fits all. And because of the diversification, huge diversification we have in the multiple industries, multiple, let's say, geographic locations, perhaps having like an overarching framework and then start detailing that, let's say, per industry or per location. But this is something that will continue to evolve, basically. But it doesn't mean that we should just like sit still, wait for that to be finalized. Actually, we should continue evolving with it, because the idea is to have that mindset of continuous involvement and continuous, let's say, progressing towards these targets.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nora. Ron, you've raised your hand, so very quickly, please. And then I would like to close with one recommendation from each. Please, Ron, your input.
All right. You said short, I'll try. Because I think there are two questions that you asked before. One is about alignment between different ESG reports, ratings, all that sort of stuff. I think that makes a lot of sense, because now it's really difficult to compare, you know, if you're high in the MSCI and not so high in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. I mean, what does that mean? And you have a whole range of reports to the discussion that's going on about, you know, how effective they are. I'm fully in line with. I mean, and I think it's not, you know, it's not so much something that should be considered at board level. I mean, it's part of sustainability hygiene that you have these reports. It's part of sustainability control and practices. It has not so much to do, and you can't, you can't take it for granted. And there are many examples. One that I mentioned in the Q&A is Volkswagen. I mean, they were one of the highest rated in the industry, and still Dieselgate happened. And I think that's the issue that, you know, all of these contestants of ESG and ESG ratings are trying to raise. You know, you can be high in any sort of rating. That doesn't mean you are, you know, you can't be affected by, you know, any sustainability issues. And I think the only way to focus on this, and this is also an answer to your previous question on competing stakeholder demands, is to keep understanding what is really material to your company, and to understand that this materiality is dynamic by nature. It's changing. You have to revisit all the time what is dynamic.
Thank you so much, Ron. So thank you all. Thank you, Liz, Nicola, Ron, Nora, Susan, Lieselot, of course, and Johan and Lieselot will come on. Just one question where if I can ask you to respond in the chat, which is, how can board continue learning about ESG, continue upskilling themselves, and how can they bridge the gap of ESG? Since we don't have time, if you can answer shortly on the chat, that would be very helpful, while I'll give the floor to Lieselot to close. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and we can continue conversation.
Thank you so much, and for a fantastic conversation. And we can really conclude that the board has a very important role. It needs to discuss how to navigate this important area and bumpy ride, and be courageous. You have to make arbitration, which is actually the board's role, and help innovate across ecosystems. If we just take the next chart, I just wanted to say something around next again. Yeah, we checked out how some of the top companies in Nordics and the world is actually having their committees. And one of the findings we have is that they actually have all implemented innovation and transformation committees. So we'll just leave you with that as a reflection. And if we go to the next one, if we can get the next slide, Ivy. You can look, besides the areas that we talked about, a fantastic document that World Economic Forum has provided, and we use very much in the Climate Governance Initiative, which is our climate governance principles. in fact, it says climate, but it can go for any ESG area. So you can look at that and get guidance and questions as well. And if we continue, we wanted to give you some lights that there are more chances to learn more. There's a fantastic event coming up on November 25-26, held by INSEAD at their Europe campus, Governance Imperative in a New World Order. There will be more information coming out on that, but do note that on the next one, we will also run a global webinar series with 24 hours packed with super interesting webinars. At 3:30 on October 12th, the Nordic one will have a focus on how engaged and active owners are actually making a super big difference. And another save the date is on September 29, where we will discuss remuneration, including sustainability, with a very experienced chair, Denise Koopmans. So if we go to the next one. We want to thank, of course, the entire participation for all of your engagement. We're so glad for the engagement in the chat. And we will come out with a little blog post. It will include also the recordings, a lot of the links to what we talked about. I'd love to thank our presenters, Ron, for this fantastic work that's really inspiring, and to our eminent panelists for sharing your experiences and your insights. Nicholas, Nora, Johan, Susan, Lisa, thank you. Not the least thanking ICGC and Sonia and Ivy for a fantastic collaboration, and to Cecilia for helping us with the chat. Thanks to everybody. Go home and make a difference. Thank you. Bye-bye.